The crisp air of early autumn carried a sense of anticipation as people gathered outside the Grand Exhibition Hall in a small town just outside Chicago. It was no ordinary day. Every year, car enthusiasts from all over the country would travel, hundreds of miles to witness one of the most prestigious gatherings of automobile history, the annual Classic Car Exhibition. Collectors had rolled in with their rarest treasures, machines polished until they glistened like jewels under the warm sunlight. But this year, there was one centerpiece that overshadowed every other car, a legend whispered among enthusiasts, the 1940 Rolls-Royce Phantom III. The owner of this masterpiece, Charles Whitmore, a 60-year-old businessman with a reputation for his wealth and refined taste, had promised the exhibition committee that the Phantom III would run for the crowd. The car was worth millions, and not just in money. It carried decades of history, stories of royalty and celebrities who once drove such models. A true testament to luxury. It gleamed under the exhibition lights, a silver-grey body that reflected admiration from every angle. But there was a problem, one so humiliating it threatened to turn Whitmore's pride into public shame. The car refused to start. Whitmore had spared no expense to make sure the Phantom III worked perfectly. Days before the event, he had flown in some of the best mechanics in the world. Teams from Los Angeles, New York, and even Europe gathered around the vehicle. Men with decades of experience, their hands trained on rare engines most people would never see in a lifetime. They worked tirelessly, taking turns examining every pipe, every valve, every bolt. Their brows furrowed, their hands greasy, their voices low as they argued about possible issues. Yet every attempt ended in the same cruel silence when they turned the key. As the minutes passed, the exhibition crowd grew restless. At first, people waited patiently, whispering about the car's beauty, about Whitmore's influence, and the stories of Rolls-Royces being the cars of kings. But soon the whispers turned into murmurs of disappointment. A few chuckled under their breath, shaking their heads. Some even muttered cruel jokes about how millions of dollars couldn't buy reliability. The embarrassment on Whitmore's face deepened as he barked orders at the mechanics. He was a man used to control, used to perfection, and this failure was tearing into his pride more than he could bear. In the background, unnoticed by the glamorous guests in suits and evening gowns, stood Samuel Green. At 45, Samuel was the janitor of the exhibition hall, a man who spent his days sweeping floors, polishing marble tiles, and making sure that everything sparkled before the crowds poured in. His uniform was plain, his hands calloused, his back bent slightly from years of work. To most of the rich collectors, he was invisible, just part of the staff, someone who existed in the shadows of their grandeur. Yet, unlike them, Samuel did not watch the car mockery or disdain. He looked at it with quiet admiration, as if respecting its stubborn silence. Beside him stood his daughter, Emily. At just 15, Emily was a sophomore in high school, but her heart beat with a passion far beyond her years. While other girls her age scrolled endlessly through phones or gossiped about school dances, Emily found herself drawn to machines. It wasn't something she could easily explain, but the hum of an engine, the smell of oil, the intricate dance of gears and pistons fascinated her. Her father, noticing her curiosity, often told her stories of the old cars that passed through the exhibitions he cleaned. He would bring home torn-out pages from old magazines or dusty manuals he found in storage, and Emily would read them as if they were fairy tales. That fascination burned brighter now as she stood in the hall, her eyes fixed on the Rolls-Royce Phantom III. She studied the elegant curves of the hood, the intricate grille, and the silent, proud figure of the Spirit of Ecstasy ornament. But most of all, her gaze lingered on the frustrated mechanics swarming around the engine. She watched carefully as they twisted wrenches, checked spark plugs, and tapped on pipes. She noticed details, small things most people would overlook, the way one mechanic ignored a faint rattle, the way another dismissed a slight unevenness in the air intake. Her sharp mind connected patterns, her young eyes seeing what others couldn't. Samuel noticed her concentration and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Emily," he whispered, "don't stare too hard. People might think you're mocking them." Emily shook her head slightly, but didn't look away. "Dad," she whispered back, "I don't think they're looking at the right thing. I read about engines like this. Sometimes the problem isn't big, it's something small, hidden, but important." Samuel sighed. He admired his daughter's intelligence, but he knew her place in the eyes of this crowd. She was just a janitor's child in the presence of billionaires and experts. "Even if you're right," he muttered, "this isn't our world. Best not to speak." The room erupted with louder groans as another failed attempt to start the car ended in silence. Whitmore slammed his hand on the hood in frustration, his face flushed red. He turned to the head mechanic and snapped, "I paid you more than some people earn in a year, and this is what I get. A dead car in front of all my guests." The mechanic, equally humiliated, stammered excuses about the car's age, its delicate wiring, its rare parts. But the excuses didn't matter. What mattered was that the car, Whitmore's symbol of prestige, sat lifeless, its engine silent, its worth mocked by the crowd's disappointed eyes. Emily's heart pounded as she continued to watch. She could almost hear the car calling out, begging for someone to truly see it, not just poke at it. She knew deep down that something was being overlooked. She wanted to step forward, to say what she saw, but she bit her lip. What could a teenager possibly say in a hall filled with experts and millionaires? She turned to her father, her voice trembling. "Steady. But, Dad, I think I know what's wrong." Samuel looked at her, startled. "Emily, don't," he said softly, shaking his head. "These men won't listen to me, let alone you." But Emily didn't waver. Her eyes stayed locked on the Phantom III, glowing with the determination of someone who believed machines had secrets waiting to be understood. For now, though, she stayed quiet. The hall was not ready for her voice. Whitmore continued his tirade. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and the mechanics grew more desperate. The legendary 1940 Rolls-Royce Phantom III, once the crown jewel of the year exhibition, sat in silence, its fate uncertain, and in the corner, unnoticed by nearly everyone, a janitor's daughter carried a secret that could change everything. The air inside the hall grew heavy as the last mechanic threw down his rag in defeat. Grease stained his gloves, his face glistened with sweat, but his shoulders slumped in surrender. One by one, the others stepped back, murmuring to themselves, avoiding Whitmore's burning glare. The once confident experts now looked like schoolboys scolded by a teacher. Charles Whitmore, his expensive suit creased with frustration, raised his voice so sharply it echoed across the hall. "Is there no one in this entire building who can make this masterpiece run again?" His words sliced through the silence, shaking the room. The crowd, already restless, fell into complete stillness. Collectors and guests exchanged glances, some pitying, some amused. A man whispered to his wife, "Millions spent on mechanics, and nothing works." Another chuckled, "That car's as dead as his pride." But among the whispers, in the shadows of the room, Emily tugged at her father's sleeve. Her eyes, wide with urgency, looked up at Samuel. "Dad," she whispered, almost trembling, "I think I know what's wrong." Her voice carried both fear and conviction. Samuel froze, his chest tightening as he met her gaze. "Emily, this isn't our place," Samuel said in a low voice, his eyes darting nervously toward the crowd. "These are professionals, men who've done this for decades." But Emily didn't flinch. She leaned closer and whispered back, her words steady despite her age. "Sometimes professionals miss the small things." Samuel's throat tightened. He had always known his daughter was sharp, her mind wired differently, her eyes catching details most ignored. But this wasn't a school science fair. This was a stage filled with billionaires, world-renowned experts, and one furious businessman. His heart wavered between fear and belief. Emily didn't back down. "Please, Dad, just tell him." Samuel inhaled deeply, then slowly stepped forward. Each step felt like crossing into enemy territory. He approached Whitmore carefully, as if nearing a lion. Clearing his throat, Samuel leaned closer and whispered Emily's idea. Whitmore's eyes flared in disbelief. He turned his gaze toward Samuel, then glanced past him at Emily. For a moment silence hung thick. Then, with a bitter laugh, Whitmore scoffed, "You mean to tell me a janitor's daughter thinks she can fix what men flown in from Europe could not?" The audience erupted in chuckles, shaking their heads. But Whitmore's arrogance was laced with desperation. He straightened, tugged at his cufflinks, and muttered, "Fine, we have nothing to lose." His voice carried loudly across the hall. "Let's see what the girl has to say." Gasps and laughter rippled through the crowd. A teenage girl fixing what world-class experts had failed at? Impossible. The mechanics themselves exchanged glances, some smirking, others folding their arms in disbelief. One muttered under his breath, "This is a circus now." Yet in the midst of ridicule, Emily stepped forward. Her heart raced, but her steps were steady, her chin lifted. The crowd parted reluctantly, giving her space as if she were walking into an arena. She reached the car, her reflection flickering across its polished silver hood. The men towered around her, their expressions a mix of skepticism and offense, but Emily ignored them. With a calmness beyond her years, she leaned over the open hood. Her fingers traced along the pipes, her eyes scanning with precision. She moved slowly, deliberately, as though the car were whispering secrets only she could hear. Unlike the others, she wasn't blinded by pride. She wasn't here to prove herself, she was here to listen. As her eyes swept the engine, something caught her attention. Nestled deep inside the machinery was a small fuel valve, corroded and nearly invisible to anyone. Rushing through, the metal looked worn, its surface darkened by years of neglect. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. This was it, the overlooked detail. She turned to one of the nearby mechanics and in a steady voice asked for a wrench. The man hesitated, then laughed. "A wrench? What do you think this is, kid?" But Whitmore's glare silenced him. Reluctantly, he handed it over. Emily's small hands gripped it firmly. Her size, once a disadvantage, now became her strength. She maneuvered her hand through a narrow gap the men's larger hands could never reach. Slowly, carefully, she adjusted the valve, twisting it with a precision that made her father hold his breath. The crowd leaned forward, some scoffing, some whispering prayers of curiosity. The wrench clicked softly as Emily tightened it into place. Then, with calm determination, she stepped back. Her voice was quiet but confident. "Try it now," she said. The words floated into the silence, carrying the weight of both hope and ridicule. Samuel's hands trembled as he reached for the key. For a heartbeat, the hall was frozen. Samuel turned the ignition. The engine groaned faintly, teasing the air with a low murmur. Then suddenly, a deep, thunderous roar erupted from the heart of the Phantom III. The car's voice filled the hall, echoing against marble walls, vibrating through the floor. The legendary Rolls-Royce had awakened. The sound was not just mechanical, it was alive, a majestic symphony of power and grace. The crowd gasped in unison, their disbelief shattering into awe. Applause erupted like thunder. Some guests clapped wildly. Others simply stood frozen, their jaws hanging open. The mechanics, men who had prided themselves on decades of expertise, stood paralyzed, their faces pale, their eyes locked on the girl, as though struggling to comprehend how a teenager had succeeded where they failed. One dropped his rag, muttering under his breath, "Impossible!" Another shook his head, whispering, "She saw what we didn't." Pride and shame clashed in their eyes, but there was no denying the truth. Emily had done it. She had listened to the car when no one else could, and now the Phantom III purred like a lion, its thunderous hum drowning out every doubt. Charles Whitmore himself was struck speechless. The man who never bowed to anyone, who commanded wealth and respect wherever he went, found himself staring at a teenage girl with humbled awe. His lips parted, but no words came out. For once his pride was silenced. He walked toward Emily slowly, as though approaching something fragile and sacred. His eyes softened, his shoulders dropped. For the first time that day, Whitmore's anger dissolved, replaced by reluctant admiration. He looked at Emily, then at Samuel, and then back to the roaring engine, as if trying to reconcile the miracle before him. Samuel, too, was stunned. His chest swelled with pride, his eyes glistened as he looked at his daughter standing tall before the entire hall. She had been mocked, doubted, dismissed, but she hadn't wavered. He wanted to shout to the world that she was his child, that she carried the wisdom of someone twice her age. Instead, he simply stood still, his heart thundering louder than the engine. Emily, however, remained calm. She didn't smile or boast. She simply stepped back, wiping her hands on her jeans, her eyes quietly satisfied. She had done what needed to be done. The hall buzzed with voices. Some applauded out of genuine admiration, others whispered excuses for the expert's failure. But the truth hung in the air, undeniable. The janitor's daughter had accomplished what the finest mechanics in the world could not. For Whitmore, it was a moment of reckoning. For the mechanics, a moment of humility. For the crowd, a lesson they would never forget. And for Emily, it was the beginning of something far greater, the moment the world finally saw her not as just a girl, not as a janitor's child, but as a mind destined for greatness. The hall was filled with thunderous applause, echoing off the high ceilings like waves of admiration. Emily stood there, her cheeks red from embarrassment, though her heart was pounding with pride. People who only moments earlier had laughed at her now clapped until their hands hurt. Cameras flashed like bursts of lightning, capturing the sight of a teenage girl standing tall beside the roaring 1940 Rolls-Royce Phantom III. The sound of that engine wasn't just mechanical, it was a declaration, one that proved even the most unlikely person could rise when given a chance. Charles Whitmore pushed his way through the cheering crowd, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. His usual air of arrogance seemed softened, replaced by awe and humility. Standing before Emily, he removed his hat in respect, something that shocked those who knew him. "Young lady," he said, his voice carrying over the noise, "you just did what the best minds in the country could not." "How?" His eyes, usually stern and unbending, now glimmered with curiosity and admiration. For the first time, Emily didn't feel like just a janitor's daughter. Emily glanced at her father, Samuel, who looked both nervous and proud. She smiled shyly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I just listened to the engine," she said softly. "Machines. They talk if you pay attention." The crowd leaned closer, hanging onto her words. Simple, honest words that carried a wisdom beyond her years. She hadn't studied in prestigious universities, hadn't trained under world-renowned engineers, yet she had seen what they missed because she cared enough to look closely. Reporters rushed forward, microphones and cameras pointed at her like arrows. "What's your name? How did you do it? Did someone teach you? Are you a prodigy?" Emily stumbled back a little, overwhelmed by the sudden storm of attention. Samuel instinctively placed a protective hand on her shoulder, shielding her from the frenzy. "Her name is Emily Green," he said proudly, his voice trembling with emotion, "and she's just 15 years old." The announcement sent another ripple of amazement through the room. Within hours, the story began to spread. News outlets picked it up instantly. 15-year-old Outsmarts experts at classic car show. Photos of Emily standing beside the glowing Rolls-Royce appeared on television, websites, and newspapers. Clips of her adjusting the hidden fuel valve played again and again, her determination frozen forever in those frames. Samuel sat at home that night, watching the news in disbelief. His daughter's name, his daughter's face, was being celebrated across the country. He wiped tears from his eyes, humbled by the pride swelling inside him. Emily, however, didn't see herself as extraordinary. When a local journalist asked her the next morning if she had planned to outsmart the experts, she shook her head quickly. "I wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong," she explained. "I just wanted to help." That answer struck a chord with people everywhere. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't luck, it was pure heart. In a world obsessed with titles, money, and prestige, a janitor's daughter had reminded everyone that sometimes the simplest intentions could shine the brightest. Opportunities soon flooded in. Colleges sent her letters offering scholarships. Engineering mentors reached out, eager to guide her talent. Organizations for women in STEM hailed her as an inspiration, calling her proof that brilliance knows no boundaries. Samuel looked at those letters with misty eyes, whispering to himself, "All those nights you sat reading by the lamp, all those times I caught you fixing toasters and bikes." This is where it led. He hugged Emily tightly, proud beyond words that his little girl was being recognized not for her background, but for her gifts. The janitor who once swept floors now walked into the museum every morning with his head held higher, not because of himself, but because of her. People who used to ignore Samuel now shook his hand, telling him how remarkable his daughter was. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. Emily's triumph had lifted him too, reminding him that his quiet encouragement had mattered all along. He remembered the times he let her hold his flashlight, the times he told her stories about old cars, little moments that had planted seeds of passion. Emily remained humble despite the attention. When asked what she wanted to do with her future, she didn't mention fame or wealth. Instead, she said, "I want to make machines that help people. If I can fix something that makes life easier for someone, that would make me happy." Those words touched hearts across the nation. People shared her quote on social media, calling her a role model for young girls everywhere. The idea that a 15-year-old could see engineering not as power, but as service, inspired thousands. The story of that day in Chicago became more than just a tale about reviving a historic car. It became a parable of resilience, humility, and hidden genius. Schools used Emily's story in their classrooms to teach students about courage and perseverance. Parents told their children about the girl who listened to the engine and refused to be intimidated by experts. And young girls who had once doubted themselves now whispered Emily's name when they dared to dream of building, fixing, and creating. Charles Whitmore, the proud businessman, was perhaps changed the most. A man who had built his empire on money and status now understood the value of humility. He later admitted in interviews, "That day a young girl reminded me that wisdom doesn't always come from the top. Sometimes it comes from the places you least expect." He even offered to sponsor Emily's education, though she politely declined, choosing instead to accept a scholarship that didn't come with strings attached. It wasn't about money for her, it was about passion and purpose. Months later, at another classic car event, Emily was invited as an honored guest. This time, she wasn't standing behind the crowd, hidden beside her father. She was front and center, given a microphone, introduced as the girl who gave life to history. When she walked onto the stage, the audience erupted in cheers, but Emily didn't let the praise overwhelm her. She simply said, "I'm just grateful I had the chance to help. That's all I ever wanted." Her sincerity left the room in silence before it erupted once more into heartfelt applause. Samuel stood in the back, tears running down his cheeks. He thought about the countless nights he had felt small, invisible, just a janitor in the shadows of wealthy men and brilliant minds. But now, he realized he had raised someone extraordinary. His daughter was proof that greatness could bloom from anywhere, even from a janitor's modest home. He whispered to himself, "Emily, you've given me more than pride. You've given me hope." In that moment, Samuel knew his life had changed forever. As time passed, Emily continued her studies, fueled by a newfound determination. She never let the fame distract her from her goals. Instead, she used it as motivation to keep learning, to keep tinkering, to keep listening to the voices of machines. "Engines have a heartbeat," she would often say. "You just have to hear it." Those words became her mantra, inspiring a new generation of engineers who believed that curiosity and care could be as powerful as any degree. That single day in Chicago became immortalized in history, not just for the revival of a legendary car, but for the revelation that genius and courage can come from the most unexpected places. From the hands of a janitor's 15-year-old daughter who dared to step forward when the world least expected it, a lesson was born. Greatness isn't about who you are or where you come from. It's about what you're willing to try and the heart you put into it. And Emily Green would forever be remembered as the girl who dared to listen.